4:03 a.m. The front door clicks open, and the sound of it, that small, ordinary sound, changes everything. Chiamaka steps inside, heels in her hand, mascara faintly smudged at the corner of one eye. Her breathing slow, controlled, deliberate. The kind of calm that only comes to a person who has made peace with a decision most people would never have the courage to make. She is not drunk. She is not afraid. She is not running from anything. She is arriving. Finally, after 7 years of slowly disappearing inside her own home, she is arriving. Back to herself. The living room light flicks on, and there he is. Ji-hoon Park, her husband, standing in the middle of the room in a white shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, his hair slightly disheveled in a way she has not seen in years. His jaw is tight. His hands, usually so steady, so composed, are at his sides, slightly curled. He has been waiting. He who never waited. He who never asked. He who for 7 long years had moved through their marriage like a ship that didn't need a port, self-sufficient, self-contained, emotionally unreachable. That man is standing in her living room at 4 a.m, and his eyes are doing something she has not seen them do in longer than she can remember. They are afraid. He opens his mouth, and when the words come out, his voice, the voice she once fell in love with, the voice that used to be so certain, so composed, is shaking. Where have you been? 3 words. 3 words that in any other marriage might mean anger or jealousy or control. But in this marriage, in this particular, quiet, suffocating marriage, those 3 words mean something else entirely. They mean, I noticed. And Chiamaka looks at him, really looks at him. And for the first time in 7 years, she does not feel invisible. She feels powerful. Because she did not come home at 4 a.m. by accident. She came home at 4 a.m. on purpose. And tonight, everything is about to change. But to understand why she did it, you have to go back. You have to understand what silence does to a person over years. What it feels like to be in a room with someone who looks through you. What it costs a woman to stay, not because she is weak, but because she believed. What it finally takes for a good man to wake up before it is too late. This is not a story about cheating. This is not a story about screaming matches or broken plates or dramatic ultimatums. This is something quieter than that. And because of that, it is something far more painful. This is a story about neglect, about the slow, invisible erosion of a marriage that looks fine on the outside, but is dying on the inside. About a woman who gave everything and was given silence in return. And about the one night she decided that if he would not notice her presence, he would notice her absence. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because this story, this is one you will want to share with someone you know. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 10 years before that 4 a.m. moment, Chiamaka Thompson was exactly the kind of woman who lit up a room without trying. She was 31 years old, working as a senior financial analyst at an international firm in Atlanta. And she had built her life with the kind of quiet discipline that comes from a woman who has never had the luxury of waiting for someone else to figure things out for her. She was Nigerian-American, second generation, raised by a mother who worked double shifts and still found time to braid her hair on Sunday mornings. She had learned early that love was not just a feeling, it was a practice. Something you showed up for every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. She was not looking for a man when she met Ji-hoon. She was looking for a coffee machine in the break room on the 14th floor when a quiet, intense man with sharp cheekbones and even sharper eyes handed her the last paper cup without a word and went back to reading his report. She said thank you. He nodded. That was it. But she noticed something. He was the only person in that room who wasn't performing. Everyone else was laughing too loudly, networking too eagerly, performing some version of themselves they thought the company wanted to see. Ji-hoon Park was simply there. Reading, present, unbothered. She found that compelling in a way she couldn't quite articulate. It took 3 months before they spoke properly. A late night working on the same international account. A shared elevator. Him asking, almost reluctantly, if she had eaten, her saying no. Him producing from his bag a perfectly wrapped triangle of kimbap and placing it on her desk without ceremony or explanation. She looked at it. Then at him. You just carry food for strangers? She asked. You're not a stranger, he said. You work on the 14th floor. You always skip lunch on report days. You take your coffee black. He paused. I pay attention. She smiled. She would remember that sentence later. Many times. In the years when he stopped paying attention entirely. But that night, in that empty office with the city glittering beneath them, she thought, here is a man who notices things. Here is a man who is quiet, but present. Here is a man who shows love through action, not words. She thought that was enough. She would spend 7 years learning that it wasn't. They fell into each other the way serious people fall, slowly then completely. There were no grand gestures, no roses delivered to the office, no songs written or windows climbed. Ji-hoon was not that kind of man, and Chia-ma-ka, who had watched too many of her friends chase performances of love instead of the real thing, respected that about him. What he gave her was steadiness. He remembered how she liked her tea. He researched Nigerian dishes and attempted jollof rice on a Saturday afternoon, burning the first pot and starting again without complaint, presenting the second attempt with zero fanfare and the quiet expectation that she would simply eat it and tell him honestly what he had done wrong. She ate it, told him the seasoning was off and the heat was too low, and watched him write it down in his phone like he was taking meeting notes. She laughed so hard she nearly cried. He looked up, confused. What? Nothing, she said. Nothing. You're something, Ji-hoon. He didn't know what to do with that. So he went back to writing his notes. She fell in love with him right then. Not for the jollof rice, for the fact that he was willing to fail quietly and try again and not make a performance of any of it. They were married 14 months later. A small ceremony. His family in Seoul on a video call. Her mother in the front row in a bright coral châle, crying before the vows even started. It was simple and real, and it felt like the beginning of something built to last. And then, they moved. Ji-hoon's company was expanding. Seoul, then Singapore, then back to the United States, settling finally in a beautiful, too-quiet suburb outside of Chicago. A house with high ceilings and a kitchen she had always dreamed of, and a backyard that turned gold in October. Chia-ma-ka paused her career. Temporarily, they said. just until they were settled, just until his company found its footing, just until things calmed down. Things never calmed down. The first year was busy, but still warm. He came home late, yes, but when he came home, he came home. He was present. They cooked together on weekends. They argued about small things and resolved them before morning. She started consulting part-time from home. They talked about children, not urgently, but with the comfortable openness of people who believe they have time. The second year, the hours got longer. He started taking calls at dinner. She started eating alone on the nights he didn't make it home by 8. She told herself, "This is temporary. He is building something." She had grown up watching her mother work herself to the bone. She knew what sacrifice looked like. She respected it. The third year, their routine separated entirely. He woke before she did. He was gone before she came downstairs. She filled the house with small comforts, books, plants, a pottery class on Thursday evenings that made her hands feel useful. They texted each other logistical information, schedules, shopping lists, confirmation of plans. "Dinner tonight?" she would ask. "Late meeting, don't wait," he would reply. She stopped waiting. The fourth year, conversations became transactions, not because either of them was cruel, but because they had both stopped reaching. It is a specific kind of loneliness, being in a marriage that has gone quiet, not the loud loneliness of a bad relationship, where at least the conflict reminds you that someone notices you exist, but the soft, suffocating loneliness of being right next to someone who has simply drifted. She would lie awake at night, listening to his breathing, and feel like she was sharing a bed with a stranger who used to know her favorite song. The fifth year, she stopped asking for his attention, not dramatically, not with a speech or an ultimatum. She simply stopped. Stopped reaching across the table for his hand, stopped suggesting they take a trip, stopped leaving little notes in his jacket pocket the way she had done in the first 2 years. She told herself she was being mature, respecting his space, not being needy. But the truth she was not yet ready to say out loud, was that she had grown tired of being rejected in small ways, of reaching and finding nothing, of speaking and not being heard. And so she had learned quietly, efficiently, the way intelligent women often do, to need less. She had learned to survive on very little. The 6th year, he stopped noticing her silence, and that was somehow the most devastating thing of all, because it meant her pain had become invisible. She had hidden it so well, managed it so efficiently, that it had ceased to register on his radar entirely. He did not know she cried in the shower sometimes. He did not know she had started journaling at 11 p.m. because writing things down was the only way to make her feelings feel real. He did not know that on her birthday, her 40th, she sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes before he came home, hoping he had remembered, that he had planned something, that he would walk through the door and she would see in his face that she was still someone worth celebrating. He walked in, distracted, kissed her on the cheek and said, "Long day. Is there food?" He had transferred money to her account that morning, a generous amount, with a message that said, "Happy birthday. Buy yourself something nice." She stared at that message for a long time. Then she bought herself a journal and a good pen, and she began to write down every feeling she had suppressed for 6 years, filling pages with the weight of a marriage that had forgotten how to see her. By the 7th year, they coexisted. And Chiamaka Thompson Park, brilliant, warm, resilient Chiamaka, had nearly convinced herself that this was simply what long marriages became. Nearly. The charity gala happened on a Thursday evening in November, and Chiamaka almost didn't go. She had received the invitation through a former colleague, a women's leadership fundraiser at a rooftop venue in downtown Chicago. The kind of event she would have leapt at 10 years ago, back when she had a career and a calendar full of things that belonged entirely to her. These days, she spent most evenings alone in the house, and a part of her had quietly accepted that as normal, as just life. But she went. She put on a wine-colored dress she had bought 2 years ago and worn exactly once. She did her hair properly, the full length of it pinned up with a few curls framing her face. She looked in the mirror before leaving and recognized distantly someone she used to be closer to. Ji-hoon was in the study when she passed the door. On a call, he did not look up. She left without telling him where she was going. He did not ask. The gala was everything that her life at home was not. Loud with laughter, warm with connection, full of women who looked at each other when they spoke. She moved through the room slowly at first, a little rusty in the way of a person who has spent too long out of the world. But the evening loosened her. She found herself laughing genuinely, debating economic policy with a woman who ran her own investment firm, sharing wine with a retired judge who had raised 4 children and somehow still managed to be funny and sharp and entirely herself. It was toward the end of the night that a man she had been introduced to briefly, a tall, silver-haired architect named David, harmless and pleasant and utterly irrelevant to this story except for what he said, looked at her across the table with the casual honesty of a stranger and said, "You know, you're too alive to look this lonely." Chiamaka froze. She smiled, deflected, said something gracious. But the words followed her home, sitting in the back of the car beside her like a passenger she hadn't invited. Too alive to look this lonely. She sat with that for the entire ride. When she got home, Ji-hoon was asleep on the couch, laptop open on his chest, the television murmuring to no one. She stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at him for a long moment. This man, her husband, still handsome in an exhausted, overworked way. Not a bad man. She had never been able to call him a bad man. But something was happening in her chest. A slow, uncomfortable shift, like a bone that had been set wrong for years, beginning finally to ache. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror without flinching away. She asked herself the question she had been avoiding for 2 years. When did I become invisible? The next evening, she waited until dinner, actually cooked, set the table properly, lit a candle, and she said to Ji-hoon, carefully, calmly, "I want to talk to you." He looked up briefly. "Is everything okay?" "No," she said. "Not really. I've been feeling very alone." A pause. His eyes moved back to his laptop screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Chiamaka, I'm in the middle of something." "You're always in the middle of something," she said. She kept her voice level. She had rehearsed this. "Ji-hoon, look at me." He looked at her. With the patient, slightly distracted expression of a man waiting for an inconvenience to pass. I feel like I don't exist to you anymore, she said. He exhaled, put the laptop aside, but only halfway. That's not true. I work hard for this family. I know you do. Then what's the problem? She looked at him for a long moment. Are you living with me? She asked quietly. Or are you just residing here? He stared at her. She watched him search for an answer, watched him open his mouth and close it again. He said nothing. That silence, that particular silence, not the comfortable kind, not the peaceful kind, but the hollow kind, the kind that meant he did not know how to reach her and had not thought to try, cracked something open in her. She did not cry. She was past crying about this. She nodded slowly, stood up from the table, took her plate to the kitchen, washed it carefully, dried her hands, and standing at that kitchen sink, staring out the window at the dark backyard, Chiamaka Thompson Park made a decision. She was done being invisible in her own life. She was not going to leave. Not yet. She was not going to scream. She was not going to threaten. She was not going to become the kind of woman who dismantled things in anger. She was going to do something quieter than that, and more powerful. She was going to disappear. Not forever. Not cruelly. But enough. Enough for him to feel, just once, what she had been feeling for 7 years. The specific weight of absence, the particular silence of a house when someone who is always there is suddenly not. If he would not notice her presence, she decided, he would notice her absence. She put the dishcloth down. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls, one to an old friend, one to a career counselor she had looked up 3 months ago but never contacted, one to a women's leadership organization whose retreat she had bookmarked and quietly longed for. By the time she went to bed that night, she had a plan, and for the first time in 7 years, she fell asleep quickly. The change did not happen overnight. It happened the way all real changes happen. Incrementally, quietly, then suddenly all at once. The first thing Chiamaka did was stop being predictable. She had been for 7 years the most predictable person in their household. Home by 6, dinner at 7, in bed by 10:30. Awake before him, breakfast made, the kitchen wiped down before he came downstairs. She had built her life around the rhythms of his absence, like a tree that grows sideways around an obstacle. Bending constantly, accommodating endlessly, so that from the outside, it still looked like growth. She stopped bending. She called a Dais first. Her oldest friend, they had grown up on the same street in Maryland, gone to separate colleges, and somehow never managed to lose each other despite years of sporadic contact. Daisy answered on the second ring, and when Chiamaka said, "I need to come back to myself. Help me," there was a pause, and then Adest said, "I've been waiting 7 years for you to say that." They talked for 2 hours. Chiamaka laughed properly, not the polite, managed laughter of a woman performing okayness, but the kind that makes your stomach hurt. She forgot for a while the particular exhaustion of her life, and remembered that she was funny, that she was interesting, that she had opinions and edges and a mind that went places. She hung up feeling like she had found a room in herself she had locked and forgotten about. She signed up for a dance class, West African Fusion, held on Tuesday and Friday evenings at a studio 20 minutes away. She had danced as a girl, knew the music in her body the way you know something you learned before you had words for it. The first class back, she was stiff and self-conscious for about 8 minutes. Then the drums started, and her body remembered what her brain had been too busy surviving to hold on to. She also joined late-night book club. Thursday evenings. A group of 8 women who met at a wine bar talked about books for 40 minutes, and then talked about life for 2 hours. She came home from the first meeting at midnight. Ji-hoon was already asleep. He didn't notice. She began dressing differently, not extravagantly. She wasn't performing for anyone else, but she started wearing colors she had stopped reaching for. Earrings she had told herself were too much. Perfume she had saved for occasions that never came. She began doing these things for herself, the way you water a plant that almost died. Carefully, consistently, with the quiet faith that it will come back. She stopped telling Ji-hoon her schedule. This was the most deliberate part. For years, she had kept him informed of her every movement. Not because he asked, but because she had developed the habit of proving she existed to someone who wasn't looking. I'm going to the grocery store. I'll be back by 4. My appointment ran late. Message after message sent to a phone that replied with one-word acknowledgments or not at all. She stopped. Ji-hoon did not notice for 2 weeks. Then one evening, he came home, and she was not there, and dinner was not made, and the house was quiet. And he stood in the kitchen for a moment with a look on his face she couldn't quite name. Not quite concern, more like mild surprise, the way you feel when a piece of furniture has been moved, and you walk into the space where it used to be. He heated up leftovers. She came home at 9:30 from book club, said hello, went to shower, went to bed. He said nothing. She said nothing. But something had shifted. A small, important thing. She could feel it. 3 weeks into her quiet transformation, she told him over breakfast, briefly without ceremony, that she had dinner plans on Saturday evening with some friends. He nodded. Okay. His eyes were on his phone. I'm not sure what time I'll be back, she added. Fine, he said. And scrolled. Saturday came. She wore a deep blue dress and her good earrings. She smelled like her own perfume. She left at 7, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like a person. The evening was extraordinary. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because she was fully present for it. A daze. 2 women from the book club, a restaurant she had been meaning to try. Conversation that went deep fast, the way it does between women who have stopped pretending everything is fine. She talked about Ji-hoon, about the 7 years, about feeling invisible. She said things out loud that she had only written in journals, and something about the saying of them made them real and survivable at once. Adaize looked at her across the table and said, "What are you going to do?" Chiamaka thought about it for a moment. "I've actually already started." She did not go home at 10. She let the evening unfold. More wine, more conversation. A walk along the river with her friends. The November air sharp and clean. She felt, for those hours, completely like herself. Not Ji-hoon's wife. Not the woman who cooked dinners that went uneaten. Just Chiamaka, whole and capable and decidedly, defiantly present. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Ji-hoon at 11 p.m. A text at 11:20. Are you coming home tonight? She read it, put her phone back in her bag, kept walking. At 1 a.m., she told her friends good night. She didn't go home. She had one more stop to make. Because Saturday night, she had also booked a room at a hotel where the Women's Leadership Retreat was holding its opening evening session. An event she had signed up for quietly 2 weeks earlier, writing the check herself from the account she had maintained in her own name since before they married. And she had another stop after that too. A meeting with a woman named Clara Osei, a business consultant at a small office space that Chiamaka had, after 7 years of setting herself aside, decided to lease. She arrived home at about 4:03 a.m., heels in her hand, eyes calm. The living room light flickered on. He was standing in the center of the room, and she had not seen him look like this in so long that for a brief, arrested moment, she simply stood in the doorway and took him in. Ji-hoon Park, who moved through every room with the composure of a man who had never once been caught off guard by the world. Ji-hoon, who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without raising his pulse. Ji-hoon, who cried at exactly one thing, the death of his father 4 years ago. A single afternoon of quiet devastation that he sealed shut within 48 hours and never reopened. That man was standing in their living room at 4 in the morning, and he looked undone, not angry. She had prepared herself for angry, had rehearsed her calm, had chosen her words carefully for that version of the night. But this was something else. His eyes were searching hers in a way they hadn't in years. The set of his jaw was tight, but his hands were open. He looked like a man who had spent the night confronting something he had no language for. "Where have you been?" His voice came out lower than usual, frayed at the edges. Chiamaka set her heels down by the door. She stood straight. She looked at him without apology, without defiance, without performance. Just clearly. "Living?" she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. She watched the ripples move across his face. Something in him flinched. "What does that mean?" "It means I was out," she said, "with people who see me, doing things that remind me who I am." His jaw tightened. "You didn't answer your phone." "I know. I called you 4 times, Chiamaka." "I know, Ji-hoon." A beat. He exhaled sharply through his nose, the way he did when he was managing something difficult. "That is disrespectful." She tilted her head. Her voice stayed even, quiet, the most dangerous kind of quiet. "For 7 years," she said, "I have been home every single night. Every night. I cooked meals you didn't eat. I kept a house you barely noticed. I waited for conversations that never came. I tried to tell you I was lonely, and you looked at your laptop." She paused. "In 7 years, Ji-hoon, did you ever once ask if I was happy?" The silence that followed was different from all the other silences in their marriage. Those silences had been empty. Comfortable in their emptiness even. The silence of mutual neglect. This silence was full, swollen with something he was finally being forced to feel. "I thought," he started. "You thought I would always be here," she said, not cruelly, just accurately. "You assumed me? Like furniture. Like something that simply exists in the background of your real life." He looked at her. She had expected defensiveness, expected him to reach for justifications. The company, the hours, the pressure, the provision, all the things he had reached for before when she had tried gently to bridge the distance. But instead, something unexpected moved across his face. It looked almost like shame. "I was scared tonight," he said. And the admission seemed to cost him. She could see it, the way a man pays for something he knows is overdue. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know if something had happened. I stood at that window and I thought. He stopped, swallowed. I thought, what if she's gone? Gone where? Chiamaka asked. Gone, he said, just that. And she understood what he meant. Not physically hurt, gone, left, decided she'd had enough. And something about the simplicity of that fear, the rawness of it, cracked the first hairline fracture in the composed surface she had maintained all night. I wasn't gone, she said quietly. I know. But I thought. He ran a hand through his hair. For 3 hours, I sat in this house, and I didn't know. And it was the worst feeling I have had in years. Maybe longer. How do you think it feels? She said. To feel that way every single day? Not because you're missing, but because you're right there and I still can't reach you. He had nothing to say to that. And because she was Chiamaka, because she had not done any of this out of cruelty, because the whole long night had been an act of love, a desperate, last-standing act of love, she decided it was time to tell him the truth. I wasn't out doing something shameful, she said. I went to dinner with Adasi and friends. Then I went to the opening session of a women's leadership retreat. She watched his face. I've been thinking about going back to work. Properly. Not consulting on the side. Building something. I found a business consultant. Her name is Clara. I've been meeting with her for 6 weeks. He blinked. 6 weeks? 6 weeks? You didn't tell me. No, she said. I didn't. Because every time I've tried to tell you things for 7 years, you were somewhere else. She held his gaze. And I needed to know that I could do this for myself first, without your input, without your permission, without waiting to see if it fit into your schedule. He absorbed that. There's something else, she said. He waited. I signed a lease, a small office space in Wicker Park. She let it sit for a moment. I'm starting a financial consultancy. I'm calling it Thompson Advisory. His name was not in it. They both understood why. If you're still watching up to now, type I'm still here in the comment section. Because this story's about to go somewhere most people aren't brave enough to look. He stood very still, and then, quietly, you did all of this without telling me. Yes, she said, because I needed to come back to life, Ji-hoon, and I couldn't wait any longer for you to notice I was dying. The words fell into the room and stayed there. I couldn't wait any longer for you to notice I was dying. Ji-hoon stood very still. He was a man who processed things internally, who had always taken the full weight of a moment into himself before responding. Chiamaka had once loved that about him. His thoughtfulness. The fact that he didn't react, he considered. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, she could see for the first time in years that the consideration was not detachment. It was pain. Isn't that what it was? He said finally. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Dying. Disappearing, she said. Slowly. And the terrifying part was that I was starting to think that was just what marriage becomes. Chiamaka. I'm serious, Ji-hoon. I started to think this is just what happens. That wanting to be seen by your husband is naive, girlish. That real adults just coexist and pay bills and survive. She paused. I almost convinced myself. He moved, not toward her, but to the armchair in the corner of the room, The one he never sat in. The one that was technically decorative. He sat down in it. Like his legs had decided he was done standing. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his face tipped toward the floor. She stayed where she was. "I don't know when I stopped," he said. "Stopped what?" "Seeing you." He looked up. His eyes were doing something complicated. "I know that's what happened. I know that. I've known in some part of me that something was wrong. I told myself if I kept working, if things were stable, if the accounts were full and the house was good, that I was doing my part." "You were," she said. "Financially, completely. I have never doubted that you worked for us. But Jai-hoon, do you know what I actually needed?" He shook his head, not dismissively, honestly. "I needed you to ask me how I was doing. Genuinely ask. Not as a greeting, not on your way to the study. I needed you to remember that I exist outside of this house. That I had a whole career I paused, a whole identity I put in storage, while you built yours." Her voice was steady, but she felt the depth of it, the years of it, moving underneath. "I needed you to sit with me sometimes, not to fix anything, just to be next to me." He was quiet for a long time. "I thought providing was loving," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, something young and exposed beneath the words, that told her this was not an excuse. It was an accounting, a real one. "My father, he worked. That was it. That was how he showed us. He was never there, but we never needed anything. And I told myself that I was like him but better, because I was at least in the same house." He paused. "But I was just as far away." She sat down on the couch across from him. The space between them felt different now. Not like the distance of the last 7 years, not the comfortable numbness of two people who have stopped reaching. This felt like the distance before something closes. "You are not a bad man," she said carefully. "I need you to hear that. I never thought you were, but you were an absent husband, and absence, quiet, consistent, unharmful-looking absence, is still a wound. It still leaves a mark." He nodded. His eyes were bright in a way she hadn't seen since his father's funeral. "I almost left you," she said, 6 months ago. I sat in my car in a parking lot for 45 minutes and thought seriously about what leaving would look like. She said it simply, without weaponizing it. I didn't leave because I still believed, somewhere under all the disappointment, that there was a version of this marriage that was worth staying for. That the man who showed up with kimbap and wrote notes on his phone about how to make jollof rice was still in there. Ji-hoon made a sound she couldn't quite name, somewhere between a laugh and something that hurt. "He is," he said. "I think he just got buried." "Then dig him out," she said. Silence. A different kind now. She stood up, straightened her dress, picked up her shoes from the door. She was not storming out. She was simply bone-tired in the way of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has finally, tonight, set it down in front of the person who needed to see the weight of it. "I'm going to bed," she said. "You should think, not about what I did tonight, but about what you've been doing for 7 years. Chiamaka." His voice caught her at the base of the stairs. She turned. "I'm sorry," he said. And she could hear it. Not a performance, not a reflex. A man staring at something he has done and finding he does not like the shape of it. She held his gaze for a moment. "I know," she said, and went to bed. She slept deeply and completely, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Ji-hoon sat in the decorative armchair until the sun came up, alone with the truest silence he had ever kept. The morning after is not often the part people tell. Everyone wants the confrontation. The 4 a.m. revelation, the shaking voice, the long overdue truth. But it is the morning after that decides everything. Because it is easy to feel something at 4 in the morning when the stakes are sharp and the adrenaline is real. It is an entirely different thing to carry that feeling into Tuesday, into the ordinary, into the breakfast table and the work call and the 1,000 tiny decisions that make up a marriage in practice. Ji-hoon was still in the armchair when Chiamaka came downstairs at 8. He looked like a man who had not slept, which he hadn't, but also like a man who had spent the night doing something more useful than sleeping. He had the look of someone who had had a long, honest conversation with himself and lost in the best possible way. He had made coffee. He had also, she noticed, set 2 cups on the kitchen counter. Not one. She poured herself a cup, sat at the kitchen island. He came to the kitchen, did not sit, just stood at the counter across from her, hands wrapped around his mug, and said without preamble, "I want to do things differently." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "I don't know how to do this well," he continued. "I know that. I was not raised in a home that talked about feelings. My parents lived next to each other for 38 years, and I think they were okay. But I don't actually know if my mother was happy, and I never thought to ask." He paused. "That's something I realized last night. Sitting there, I don't know if she was happy." Chiamaka set her cup down. "I don't want that," he said. "I don't want to find out in 30 years that you weren't happy. Or worse, find out because you leave." "What are you saying, Ji-hoon?" "I want to try. Properly." He met her eyes. "Therapy. Whatever that looks like. I've always thought it was for people who couldn't manage themselves. I know that's wrong. I know it now." He said it plainly, without embarrassment, which cost him something. She could see it. "I want to go with you, if you'll come." She considered him. This man, stubborn and controlled and emotionally sealed in the way of people who learned early that showing softness is the same as showing weakness. This man who she had married because beneath all of that, she had sensed something real, something steady, something worth the work. She had been right about that part. She had simply underestimated how much work it would take to get back to it. "I'll come," she said. And that was not a fairy tale moment. There was no swelling music. He did not cross the kitchen and sweep her into his arms. She did not cry. They sat across from each other drinking coffee in the winter morning light. And it was ordinary and real and, because of that, more hopeful than any grand gesture could have been. They found a therapist 2 weeks later. A Korean-American woman named Dr. Park, different Park, who had a practice in Lincoln Park and a no-nonsense warmth that worked for both of them. The first session was uncomfortable in the way of all honest things. Ji-hoon did not like being asked to name what he was feeling. He sat with it. Chiamaka was further along in her own self-knowledge. She had been doing this emotional excavation alone for years, in journals, in late-night conversations with Adaz. But in therapy she discovered new things too. that some of what she had called patience had actually been self-erasure, that she had participated quietly in her own disappearance. By letting things slide, by telling herself not to be needy, by making herself smaller until being small felt like virtue. She had some undoing to do as well. This was not entirely his failure. It had taken 2 people to build that particular silence. They went every 2 weeks. Sometimes they fought in the parking lot before sessions. Ji-hoon was not suddenly converted into an emotionally expressive man, and Chiamaka was not suddenly, without frustration. There was one evening, the 3rd month, when she told him in session that she still didn't feel like he was listening. And he said, with a tightness she recognized as contained hurt, "I rearranged my entire schedule to be here with you every other week, and I still fall short." And she said, "Showing up is the minimum, Ji-hoon. I need you to also arrive." Dr. Park let that sit. He thought about it for 3 days. Then on a Thursday evening, he came home at 6:30. Genuinely 6:30, something that had not happened in 4 years. And he sat at the kitchen table while Chiamaka cooked. And he asked her, with the careful deliberateness of a man doing something he has rehearsed, "What was good about your day?" She stopped stirring, turned around, looked at him. "What?" she said. "What was good about your day?" he repeated, his eyes on her face, present. She felt something shift in her chest, something small and old and almost forgotten. She told him. A full 10 minutes, a call that went well with a new client, a coffee with Clara, a song she'd heard on the drive home that reminded her of Atlanta. He listened. He asked a follow-up question. He did not look at his phone. It was not everything, but it was something. And something Chiamaka understood by now was always how everything begins. Thompson Advisory opened its doors on a Tuesday morning in March. The office in Wicker Park was small, a reception area, 2 meeting rooms, 1 private office with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted winter jasmine that was just beginning to bloom. Chiamaka had furnished it herself, deliberately, the way you decorate a space you intend to grow in. Clean lines, good light, a painting on the wall she had picked up from a Nigerian artist whose work she had followed for years and never felt entitled to buy. She bought it now, for herself, for the wall of something that was finally entirely hers. Onsi or Rust, morning of the opening, she stood in the center of her office before anyone arrived, and she breathed in slowly. She thought about the woman who had stood in a parking lot 6 months ago, considering what leaving would look like. She thought about the woman who had eaten birthday dinners alone, who had made herself smaller and called it maturity. She thought about the woman who had come home at 4:03 a.m. and refused, finally, to disappear. There was a knock at the door. Ji-hoon, standing in the doorway of her office in his good coat, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, the kind from the place on the corner she had mentioned once, months ago in passing. He had remembered. He was learning to remember. "Congratulations," he said. And he meant it. She could hear the fullness of it, the genuine pride of a man who was still learning to say things out loud but was trying daily, in the labored and imperfect way of real people doing real work. She accepted the coffee. They stood together at the window, looking out at the jasmine. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified," she said. and completely alive. He nodded, and then, quietly, in the way of a man who does not reach easily but is learning to reach anyway, he put his arm around her, not dramatically, just there, present. She leaned into it slightly. They stayed like that for a moment, watching the courtyard, and it was not the marriage they had had 7 years ago, when everything was still new and neither of them had yet understood the ways they could fail each other. It was something more complicated than that, more earned. The kind of closeness that comes not from ease, but from two people choosing, with full knowledge of the cost, to keep choosing. 6 months later, she came home from a late client meeting at midnight. The house was lit from inside, warm against the dark. When she opened the door, Ji-hoon was awake in the living room. Not working, just there. A book open in his lap, the television off. He looked up when she came in. He smiled. "Welcome home," he said. I waited. Chiamaka stood in the doorway for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to feel the full weight of those 3 words. So simple, so ordinary, and so entirely different from where have you been. Long enough to understand that she had not come home at 4 a.m. all those months ago to punish him. She had come home at 4 a.m. because she loved him enough to give their marriage one last honest chance. And he had, slowly, imperfectly, with enormous difficulty and real determination, begun to show up. She came inside. She sat beside him on the couch. She didn't say anything for a moment. And she said, "Tell me what you're reading." And he did. This is the part of the story that is hardest to explain, but most important to understand. They did not end up with a perfect marriage. Ji-hoon still worked long hours. He still went quiet sometimes in ways that frustrated her. She still occasionally felt the ghost of old loneliness on the days the distance crept back in. She still had mornings where she had to remind herself, consciously, not to make herself small. But they had something they didn't have before. A language. A practice. A shared understanding that love, real, lasting love between 2 real people, is not a feeling you fall into and maintain. It is a decision you make repeatedly on the days it is easy, and especially on the days it is hard. Ji-hoon had learned, is still learning, that provision is not presence, that showing up financially and physically is not the same as arriving emotionally, that a woman can have everything in her house and still be starving if no one looks at her like she matters. And Chiamaka had learned, is still learning, that she cannot disappear and expect to be found, that she must continue, even in the hardest seasons, to take up space, to say the thing, to ask for what she needs, not as a demand, but as a declaration of self-worth. They both had to grow. That's the truth of it. The uncomfortable, unsatisfying, necessary truth. Sometimes people don't change because you beg them to. They change because they almost lose you, and that almost is enough to break through every wall they've spent years building. And sometimes you don't change because someone sees you clearly. You change because you finally choose to see yourself. Now, before you go anywhere, if this story moved you, if you recognize something in Chiamaka's silence or in Ji-hoon's absence, we want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in a relationship? Have you ever confused provision with love? Or patience with self-erasure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you think this marriage was complicated, Wait until you hear about the wife who disappeared for 3 days and what her husband found when she came back. That one will sit with you for a long time. If you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this one don't change things because they go viral. They change things because the right person watches them at the right moment. Maybe that person is you. Maybe it's someone you love. Either way, thank you for staying until the end.